Hey everyone, welcome back. In this one, we are going to see what kind of security website he uses. Okay, so this lecture is going to be really important. So don't skip, watch step by step everything. First, I'm going to discuss everything on my board, and then we are going to do practical or see practically what is happening. Okay, so without wasting time, let's get started. So let's open the board right here, and as you can see in the board, you can see my one browser here. So on the browser we have opened the Google website, right? So let's talk about the browser side first, or you can say client side. Whatever we see here, we say client side. Okay, so I'll just write here client. Okay, so what kind of security being used on the website on client side? That's the question we should be asking. So first is quite obvious, I don't need to explain anything. First is obviously the login. Okay, so almost each and every website has a login. We need to enter username, password, or phone number and password. Then we can enter in the website. That's the obvious thing. Then there is a second kind of security which is using is 2FA, or you can say two-factor authentication. Inside the 2FA, we have mobile authentication, we have email OTP authentication, or you can say let's say OTP authentication, OTP one-time password authentication, and we can say Google Authenticator or Authenticator apps. Okay, it can be any other app. It is not necessary that it will use the Google Authenticator. So these are the security are being used on the client side. Okay, so when we talk about the website, obviously it is connected to the server. Okay, so where we get those servers? So there are server providers, or you can say cloud provider. To name a few, we know AWS, Amazon Web Services, right? Then there is a Google Cloud provider, Google Cloud provider. Then there is a Linode. Then there is a DigitalOcean, Vultr, Contabo, Hasner. So we have a lot of provider. So in this example, we will say that it is using Google Cloud provider. Okay, so hence we are using Google's website right here in the example. So we will say it's a Google Cloud provider. So let's pick different color and let's say Google Cloud. Okay, so in the Google Cloud they are creating a server. Okay, so let's say this is my server right here. Okay, so we will say server. Okay, let's make server a little bit bigger because we need to explain the things inside this server also. Okay, so let's say this is my server. Okay, and inside a server also we have the web server software differently, database differently, and we have the website files differently. In case of Google, I'm not sure how it is in the backend, but usually I am explaining the typical scenario where we inside a server we have this web server software like Nginx. Then we have the file system, or let's say files, and then we have the database right here. Okay, database, it's a database. Okay, so let's say when we request for the google.com, it will be getting sent from here to somewhere here to the Nginx, or let's say web server software. Then Nginx will be connected to these files, which is website files, and obviously the website file or web app will be having access to the database. Okay, so this is how the typical connection in all of the websites, right? So we first discuss about the client side, right? So these are the red. In the red we have the login, two-factor authentication. These are client side. What happens in the transport, like between server and client? This part right here I'm talking about. Okay, so in this part we have security called SSL. Okay, so it's a basically secure version of the HTTP. We say HTTPS. So if you open any website in the Google website also, as you can see right here, we get this green lock icon, right? So that is actually the SSL. Okay, so if you go to the any website, like I'm opening fluxset.com, as you can see right here, we have here green icon. It is not green anymore because the style is changed, but it says connection is secure. What does this mean? That means the site is using SSL. So we will add here SSL security. It's a security on transport level here. Okay, now we have the third part of the security. Okay, so on the server also, before reaching the request to the server, we have something called WAF, web application firewall. This service is basically provided by the cloud providers. So suppose I'm using Google Cloud, then one service will be this creating the server, and another service that will Google provide is let's say WAF, web application firewall. Okay, so basically what web application firewall does, it will filter all traffic before reaching the server. Okay, so basically it will go through this. Okay, so let's say this is our web application firewall. Okay, so what exactly web application firewall do? So web application firewall is a quite complex advanced topic or advanced software that can do a lot of things, but in the basic, if I explain the web application, okay, so I will use the green color there for this one also, WAF, because it's on the transport level only. So in the WAF, we can block the certain IPs, we can block the certain ports. Suppose your website is hosted on this server, so that means port 80 and port 443 will be used. For 80 for HTTP connections, 443 for HTTPS connection. So we don't necessarily need to express all of the port, right? So we will block all of the rest port. So in the web application firewall, we can just create a rule, only allow port 80 and 443, right? So that's what we can do in the web application firewall, right? So let's say port rule. Okay, I'm just writing here, but it's way more in detail. I'll just write the broader point here. Okay, so let's say port rule are there in the web application firewall. We have the advanced level of firewall where they can check each and every packet coming from the client side. They can check what is inside the packet. If the packet is malicious, that will be blocked on the web application firewall. So that's the advanced level of the security that is not necessarily used by most of the website. They will be only used by Google's and Amazon's, or let's say Netflix, that kind of guy. I'm not sure if Netflix is using that, but yeah, Google will definitely use that, right? So that kind of things can happen in the web application firewall. But just take a overlook, right? What is web application firewall? It is just a service provided by the cloud providers to protect your servers, right? That's a web application firewall, or WAF. Okay, most of the time it is being used for the websites, so that's why it is saying web application, right? But it can be used to protect your whole infra, right? That's the thing. The last type of security we have is inside the server, right here. Okay, so inside the server, what kind of security we have? The first thing is firewall. So we saw this firewall, which is provided by the cloud provider, but on the OS level also we have the firewall, right? So I will say right here firewall. Okay, so what kind of firewall? So if you are using Ubuntu, there is a by default firewall called UVFW. Okay, UBUNTU, Ubuntu. And if you go for CentOS or Amazon Linux or something, then they will provide called Firewall D. Firewall D. That's their default firewall installed in the CentOS. Okay, CentOS. Okay, so these kind of firewall exist on the OS level, and these are just a free or basic firewalls that come by default in the OSs. Okay, nowadays UFW also don't come by default. We need to install it, but it used to come by default in the Ubuntu servers, right? So these are the two default firewall, the basic firewall. There are paid firewall also available that server people can install on their servers and protect their data, right? So I will write here custom. I'm not going to name any firewall here, but yeah, there are firewall available for network level, for web application level, for OS level, all kind of security. It's kind of antivirus software for the server. Okay, so we have the firewall. Okay, now, so by the way, the firewall is inside the OS is a really crucial point. Okay, then we have the protection on the files. Okay, right here. So what kind of protection? We say the permissions. Okay, so I will say file permissions. Okay, so I don't have place here, so I'll just add comma here and I'll say file permissions. Okay, what kind of permissions? Okay, so let's say you have the website and there are some bin files or there are some PHP file. If those file has an executable permission, that can lead to let's say remote access shell or something like that. Okay, basically it can lead to the really serious vulnerability, right? So that's why we limit the permissions, the activity of file using the permissions. We can set the permission to only read only or write only. We will not allow that file to execute, right? So similarly we have the permissions. What kind of permission we have? We have read permission, we have write permission, we have execute permission. X is a execution. Okay, execution permission. So these are the main three type of the permissions we have in the Linux. Obviously there are a lot of things in the permissions also, like user level permission, group permission and that stuff, but it will be explained later, okay, in the next videos. But try to understand there is a permissions also. And then we go to the database level. Okay, so obviously in the database level also we have authentication. Okay, it can be the certificate based authentication, it can be username password based authentication, or it can be the token based authentication. This authentication will be between the file and the database. If files want to access the database, obviously they need to provide some kind of authentication. So authentication is basically token authentication, or let's say user name authentication, username pass authentication, or we can have a certificate authentication. Okay, so some of you might confuse like what is the certificate authentication. We know that token authentication is like some random token, that's a token authentication. We know username and password authentication, obviously username and password obviously. And what is a certificate based authentication? So you can say that there is a file with some certificate data inside it, and if we use that file before making the connection or while making the connection, it will automatically authenticate. Basically that certificate file has a public key, or let's say some kind of key inside. So it will database will try to check if that key is allowed or not. Okay, it's nothing but the kind of token authentication only. But when we say certificate authentication, it will make more sense. Okay, I will not go into the detail, but yeah, if there is a certificate authentication also. Okay, so let's erase this. Okay, so these are the basic security every single website uses. Obviously not every single, but most of the website are using. Okay, now sometimes what happens, there is a one kind of security which is kind of logical security. It's not really the main security, but they try to create the logically. Let's say I'm using the Google, accessing google.com, right? But whatever image you see in the Google's logo can be accessed from the somewhere else. Like when we send a request for this particular image, it will go through the web application firewall, obviously right here, and it will not go to the it will go to the nginx, but it will not go to the this particular guy, okay, or this particular server at all, because it might be possible that someone is Google is hosting their static file on different server. Okay, so we have server like this, which is a basically static file server. So request hour will go right here. It can be like static .google.com, okay, something like that, right? So it can store static file using let's say S3 protocol, right? So in that case we have S3 token. So again it is a token authentication, but they are kind of sorting out the impact. Okay, they are moving the services outside. Okay, so this is how they are doing. Okay, so yeah, whenever you go, wherever you go, there are only these type of authentication: login, two-factor, encryption. I will say encryption. I will not say SSL. Encryption. Then there is a web application firewall, or you can say global level firewall. Then there is a firewall. Then there is a file permissions, and obviously at the end we have in the authentication, there is a certificate based authentication. Okay, so these are the major type of the authentication we have. On the Google Cloud level, we have one type of security also, we call IAM. So basically we can create a sub user and we can assign the roles. It is a wholly part of the any cloud architect infra, like AWS, like Google. It is not related directly to the website, but yes, we have that part also, will that which will be not covered here. I'm just giving you idea so that in future if I am to cover, you will have a little bit idea what is happening here. Okay, so yeah, that's all about the authentications. Yeah, I try to cover all basic on the authentications, but if I miss anything, please let me know, and if you have any question, please add. By the way, there is one more authentication I just remembered. On web server level in the Nginx also, we have the functionality called basic auth, right? So we can add the authentication functionality in the Nginx also, right? One is basic auth, then we have another also, then we have another also, right? Redis based authentication and that stuff, right? But yeah, that's all about the kind of security website will be using, right? Not all website use this type of security, all of this security, but most of the time all popular big cloud providers have same kind of security architecture, or they will be using same kind of security. Okay, in order to do bug bounties, in order to do some kind of penetration testing, we should be having picture in the mind what kind of security website or our target will be using, so that we can take steps accordingly, or we can plan our attack accordingly, or we can plan our red teaming accordingly, right? So yeah, that's all about the authentication. If you have any doubt, please let me know in the comments, or obviously there is a community called fluxset.com where you can put your questions and people will answer. If people are not answering, obviously I'm there to answer your questions, right? So don't shy, go there and put the question there, and if you like it, you know what to do. Okay, see you in the next.